All right, I'm very anxious for this edition of On the Line because we're going to be joined by a really interesting guest. Her name is Amy Trask. Right now you're going to see her on CBS Sports. She's a football analyst for CBS, but the timing is really good for our chat here with Amy because the NFL just concluded its annual spring owners meetings, and Amy is in the business of analyzing the NFL right now, but there was a time when Amy was going to these owners meetings to conduct business on behalf of the Oakland Raiders and the National Football League. So this is going to be a really cool and fun chat, and I want to welcome Amy in right now and say hello to her. Hello, Amy.
Well, it is my great privilege and pleasure to join you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Folks who want to follow Amy's work can find some of it on Twitter at Amy Trask, A-M-Y Amy Trask, T-R-A-S-K. And if you do that and check out some of her work, you'll notice she's got a pretty cool custom on Twitter. No matter what's going on in your conversation, your arguments, your exchange of ideas, you always finish it up with a simple and friendly and hi. Tell us what's behind that, Amy.
I love to say hello to people. I love to say hi. I have done this forever and ever and ever. Walking down the street, in an elevator, in a hotel, or in a lobby area, when I see someone, when I walk by someone, I say hi. Mm-hmm. So I've done that on the real world streets. And as I consider our Twitter exchanges to be the Twitter street, if you will, mm-hmm. for our Twitter village, I enjoy saying hi to people on that, shall we say, web street as much as that sort of street in the ether as much as I enjoy saying hi in the real world.
Well said. I want to make sure I think this timeline I have right because I was looking it up. I think that your career path, in the National Football League, Amy, was really interesting. You began as an intern in the early 80s and rose your way up the ranks, and eventually in the late 90s you were the chief executive officer for the Oakland Raiders. Tell us a little bit about that time, what you learned about the industry, and sort of what things you've carried into your post working for a team life.
I did start with the organization as an intern in the early part of the mid-'80s, joined the organization on a full-time basis in the latter part of the mid-'80s, and I was there for almost 30 years. My title did change over time. I think titles are at best meaningless and unnecessary, but Al did give that title to me, which was quite a statement on his part. And I grew up on the job. I grew up in every respect on the job, and I learned on the job, and that certainly doesn't differentiate me from many people. But I think what does differentiate me is that I spent almost 30 years in one place. And so all of my mistakes, all of my learning, all of my growing up stayed with me. And you know what? That was okay.
Yeah. Part of your job when you were with the Raiders, Amy, was to go to these owners meetings, in a lot of ways, just like the Combine, I think owners meetings are getting a little more exposure every single year. But of course, there's not total exposure. So the folks who are listening or watching, walk them through a little bit, just the high level view of these owners meetings and sort of what your experiences were with them and what the purpose of them was.
Started my career in the National Football League. Not only was there no Twitter or as Bill Belichick would say, Snapface, and with the NFL Network, which didn't exist when I began my career, there is more coverage. But there are different types of owners meetings. There is the sort of owners meeting that we just saw go on in Arizona. That is the annual owners meeting at which quite a few people from each club attend. My experience is that the real nitty-gritty business of the National Football League, not with respect to rules changes, but the other nitty-gritty business, doesn't get done at this annual meeting. It gets done at the periodic meetings throughout the year, which are open to either one person per club or two people per club. But that sort of business doesn't happen at these larger group meetings.
I know we got to get you out of here quickly, but I have one more that I really want to get your opinion on, and that is something that did come from the owners' meetings, and it was a sort of a quasi-rule change or amendment, I guess more of a process change, and that is the inclusion now of defensive and offensive pass interference calls and non-calls into the review process, the coach's challenge process for most of the game, and then inside of 2 minutes, the booth process. What are your thoughts on this? How big of an impact is this going to have on games for fans as they're watching it?
Work should be done to make sure, to the extent possible, that officiating is done correctly. So, look, there is vastly greater, better, and more technology now than there was when I started in the league, and it makes sense to use that technology to help get these things right. But on the other hand, where do you draw the line? Some of this is subjective. By the way, if I'm determining on review whether or not there was defensive or offensive pass interference, am I also determining on review whether the ball was catchable? Because one of the tests for defensive pass interference was it catchable? So are we going to review both elements? That's a question. And by the way, just as we saw it multiple times in the playoffs, most notably in the New Orleans game, a pass interference call or non-call, if you will, can change the outcome of a game. But you know what? 6 other things in that game could have changed the outcome, like the roughing call on that wasn't made when Goff was hit, which would have set the Rams up on the 1. I mean, it's a little bit like that movie Sliding Doors, which I know a lot of your listeners are young and they're going to have to go Google that. But, there's umpteen ways that game could have changed. And yes, we need to get it right. So I like that. But why DPI? Why not any number of other fouls? So I'm of mixed mind, and I do think we will see a lot of calls in the preseason as people start learning about this, and then hopefully we'll see things sort of reach their equilibrium as the season starts.
Yeah, and this is on a 1-year trial basis, if I'm not mistaken, and that's a good way to do it, because you'll do it for a year, see if it worked or not. And some rules get that treatment and they get thrown out after a year. Some rules get that treatment and they get ratified in.
I do like the effort to do everything possible to get as much right as possible. But there are unintended consequences of these things. And I think we have to be careful. And we also have to say, well, wait a minute. Is this just a reaction to those blatant calls and non-calls? And should we only be focusing on DPI or even offensive pass interference? And of course then, and maybe this is another conversation for another day, do we again have the conversation about whether that should be a spot foul or a 15-yard penalty?
Right. Interesting. Last thing, Amy, I don't know if you caught this or not during the owners' meetings because there was so much other stuff going on, but Vikings owners, the Wilf family, made a big donation to the Pro Football Hall of Fame, where I think it's going to help honor a lot of the founders of the league. And someone that you worked for, Al Davis, certainly is considered, someone who's a founder of the league. So I hope you're able to pay attention to that and make your way to Canton the next time and see part of what so many owners are contributing, including the Wilfs.
I did note that, and I'm very, very glad that you raised the Wilfs. I overlapped in the league with the Wilfs for a number of years, and I enjoyed every interaction I had with every single member of that family. I think that they bring tremendous value to the league as a whole, and while they care deeply and passionately about the Vikings, it was my observation that they cared deeply and passionately about the league as a whole, and I think the league is better for the involvement of the Wilf family.
Oh, that's very nice of you to say. Thank you, Amy, and thank you for your time here today. This was a good conversation. There is so much more I wanted to get into you, but unfortunately we don't have the time, so I think maybe we'll look you up down the road sometime and we'll chat more. Okay?
I would love that, and I appreciate it.
You bet. Talk to you later, Amy.